I refused her command, and that's when the alien queen fell in love. The balcony hung above the empire like a blade of glass. Beyond it, the stars spilled like silver dust, and a distant planet turned slowly in the dark. The wind moved the queen's long fabric like in water, and the edge of her crown caught the light with a cold, perfect gleam. Every guard on the terrace stood still, not because they were calm, but because they were afraid to breathe in the presence of her authority. Queen Salith of the Vayari stood at the rail, cute in a way that made her power feel even more dangerous, small, poised, almost delicate. Yet her eyes carried the weight of entire worlds. She did not need to shout. She did not need to threaten. Her will was law, and the empire had been trained to obey it the way bodies obey gravity. Behind her, the human envoy waited at the exact distance the court protocol demanded. Jonah Reed did not kneel, because humanity did not kneel to rulers. But he also did not stand with pride like a challenge, because pride was another kind of violence. He stood with his hands open, palms visible, not aggressive, not pleading, just honest. The queen turned slowly. For a moment her expression was shocked, as if she was seeing a mistake in the universe. Then the shock hardened into intrigue. The way a storm hardens into purpose. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, and still the entire terrace tightened as if a weapon had been drawn. "You will sign the accord of service," she said. "You will command your fleet to escort my tribute ships. You will prove that your species belongs inside my order." Jonah breathed in, steady. He had crossed 3 systems to stand here. He had watched diplomats flatter and bend until their spines looked broken. He had watched other species trade their children for safety and call it peace. He had promised himself he would not become another quiet failure. He looked at her crown, then at her eyes, then he spoke clearly, without heat, without contempt. "No," Jonah said, "I refuse your command." A silence fell so sharp it felt like it could cut skin. A guard's fingers switched toward a weapon, then froze. A court advisor made a tiny choking sound, like someone who had swallowed panic. The queen did not move. Her pupils narrowed slightly. The way a predator adjusts focus. "Did you misunderstand?" "Me, human?" she asked. "I do not offer requests." Jonah kept his hands open. "I understood you," he said. "And I still refuse." The wind lifted Selith's fabric again, and for a heartbeat, her crown flashed. The empire waited for thunder. They expected the human to be punished, to be dragged away, to be made an example, because refusal was not just disobedience. It was a crack in the sacred story the Vayari told themselves about control. But the queen did not punish him, not yet. Instead, she stepped closer, until the warm rim light from the balcony lamps touched the edges of her face. Up close, Jonah saw the smallest details. The ultra-fine texture of her skin, the careful lines of her makeup, the softness at the corner of her mouth that did not match the legend of her cruelty. Cute, yes, in an almost disarming way, and dangerous. Because the most dangerous blades were the ones that looked like ornaments. "Why?" Salith asked. "Why would you refuse when I can take what I want?" Jonah swallowed. "Because taking is not belonging," he said. "Because fear makes allies that run at the first chance. Because my people do not answer to crowns, even beautiful ones." A few courtiers flinched. At the word beautiful, the queen's brows lifted slightly, the first crack in her certainty. "Beautiful ones," she repeated, tasting it. Then her gaze sharpened again. "You think flattery will protect you, human?" Jonah shook his head once, small and calm. "That was not flattery," he said. "That was observation, and still, I refuse." Selith's lips parted, shock again, very brief, then something stranger. A flicker like curiosity trying to climb out of a sealed room. "You are either brave," she said, "or stupid." Jonah held her eyes. "Maybe both," he said. "But I will not sign an accord that turns my fleet into your leash. If we cooperate, we will cooperate as equals. If we trade as partners. If we fight, we fight. But I will not pretend obedience is peace." The court held its breath. Jonah could hear his own pulse inside the silence. He could also feel something else, like the air itself was waiting to see if the queen would destroy him or not. Salith took one step back, then another, slow, thoughtful, for the first time. Her voice softened not with kindness, but with control over her own surprise. "Human Jonah Reed," she said, "do you know what happens to those who refuse me?" Jonah nodded. "I have read your history," he said. "Your empire calls it purification. Humans call it massacre." Several advisors hissed. A guard finally drew breath, loud and offended. Salith raised one finger, and the entire terrace went still again. Her control was absolute, and Jonah felt it like pressure on his ribs. Then she asked, quietly, "If you know I can destroy you, why stand here with open hands?" Jonah let the question hang for a heartbeat, then answered with the truth. "Because I am tired of empires mistaking silence for consent," he said. "Because my species survived by learning when to say nitrogen monoxide. Because if I cannot say nitrogen monoxide to you, then any yes I give you is worthless." The queen stared at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Something unsettled. A queen was trained to interpret refusal as a threat. But Jonah's refusal sounded like a boundary, not a coup. And that difference landed in the space where her certainty used to be. The distant planet in the sky drifted through a band of thin cloud. Star bokeh glittered around it like scattered jewels. Jonah noticed, absurdly, that the scene looked like a moment painted for romance. Then he felt the danger again, because romance was another kind of battlefield. And the queen did not lose battles. Salith turned away toward the railing. She looked out at the stars, as if the galaxy might explain him. Behind her, one advisor leaned toward another and whispered a single word with horror: "Impossible." Jonah heard it. He knew what they meant. A queen could not be refused and still remain queen. If refusal existed, then power was not divine, it was negotiated, and negotiation was a language the Veari Empire pretended did not exist. Salith spoke without turning. "You do not fear me, Jonah." Answered carefully, "I do fear you," he said. "I fear what you can do. I fear what you have already done. But fear is not the same as worship." The queen's shoulders lifted slightly, then eased, a subtle reaction, almost human. Then she turned, and Jonah saw her expression had changed. The shock was gone. The threat was quieter. Now she looked like someone studying a puzzle that might also be a door. "You will come with me," Salith said. "Not as a prisoner, as a guest, until I decide what to do with a species that does not bend." Jonah knew he should have said no again, but refusing a second time would not be courage. It would be stupidity that endangered everyone behind him. He nodded once. "As long as my team is safe," he said. "As long as my ship remains free to leave. And as long as you understand one thing." Salith tilted her head. "What thing?" Jonah met her gaze. "You cannot command my heart," he said. "You cannot command my loyalty. If you want them, you will have to earn them." A murmur rippled through the court like wind through dry leaves. The queen's cheeks warmed slightly beneath the rim light. A faint blush that would have been cute if it were not so dangerous. For a breath, Jonah thought he saw it. The moment the alien queen, who had been loved only by fear, felt something else, not surrender, not weakness, interest, and in that moment, the empire shifted, just a little, not because Jonah was strong, but because he had introduced a new law into the queen's world. The law that said a person could say nitrogen monoxide and still be worthy. They led Jonah through halls that felt like carved starlight. High arches, soft luminous panels, silent guards, every step echoed with the question, why is he alive? Why is he not kneeling? Why is she letting him walk beside her? Salith moved ahead, her crown steady, her posture perfect. Yet Jonah noticed the smallest changes. The way she glanced at him as if checking whether he would flinch. The way her fingers brushed the edge of her own sleeve, restless. The way her advisors looked confused, like their world had developed a crack and they were afraid to look into it. In a private chamber, Salith dismissed everyone, the door sealed. The silence felt less like fear and more like intimacy. "You are calm," she said. Most species tremble when they stand alone with me. Jonah sat only after she sat, not as submission, but as respect for space. I am calm because I have trained for this, he said, and because I do not want to harm you. Salith leaned forward slightly. Harm me, she repeated. Amused, human. Your fleet is small. Your reach is limited. You cannot harm the Vayari Empire. Jonah did not argue the numbers. He argued the truth. Empires fall from inside, he said. Not from outside. I am not here to fight you. I am here to stop you from creating the kind of enemy you cannot survive. Salith's eyes sharpened. What enemy? Jonah hesitated, because the next words could start a war. Then he said them anyway, because silence would kill more. The enemy called desperation, he said. The enemy called rebellion. The enemy called 100 species deciding they would rather burn than kneel. Salith stood, sudden like a blade being lifted. You come into my palace and threaten me, she said. Jonah rose too slow. Hands open again. I am not threatening you, he said. I am warning you. A threat says, I will hurt you. A warning says, please do not become someone I must stop. For several breaths, they faced each other, queen and human, crown and open hands. Authority and boundary. Then Salith did something Jonah did not expect. She laughed once, softly disbelieving. It was not cruel laughter. It was the sound of a world discovering it had been living in a smaller room than it realized. You speak to me as if I am a person, she said, not a symbol, not a throne, a person. Jonah nodded. Because you are, he said, and because the galaxy will. Keep bleeding until rulers remember that. Salith walked toward the window wall, outside. The stars looked close enough to touch. She pressed her fingertips to the transparent surface. When I was young, she said, they taught me love was a weakness. They taught me mercy was a leak in the hull. They taught me command was the only language that mattered. Jonah listened, and he felt the story underneath her crown. A child molded into a weapon. A girl taught to survive by becoming unapproachable. A queen whose loneliness had been disguised as greatness. Salith turned back, her eyes reflective. You refused my command, she said, and I should have destroyed you. Yet I did not. Tell me why I did not, human. Jonah answered quietly. Because loud truth would frighten her into armor again. Because you wanted to be seen, he said, and for the first time, someone looked at you and did not beg, did not flatter, did not fear you into distance. Someone looked at you and said, no, and still meant, I will not hurt you. Salith's lips parted. Shock again, but softer, like wonder. That is not possible, she whispered. Jonah stepped closer, not too close, respectful. It is possible, he said, but it will change you. Salith's gaze held his, her voice dropped. Almost vulnerable. What if I do not want to change? Jonah breathed out. Then the galaxy will force it, he said, and it will not be gentle. The next days became a storm of quiet tests. Salith summoned Jonah to court sessions and watched him refuse smaller commands. Politely, consistently, she offered him gifts and watched him accept only what could not be used as a chain. She asked him questions disguised as orders, and he answered with honesty, not obedience. The empire reacted like a living creature fighting a fever. Some advisors grew furious, some grew frightened, some grew curious in secret, and the queen, the terrifying queen, found herself waiting for the human's next refusal, the way a person waits for a familiar song one night. Alarms rang through the palace. A threat on the outer ring. A captured envoy from a client species. Beaten, dragged before the court. The client species had tried to rebel. Had tried to escape tribute. The old answer was execution. Salith sat on her throne. Crown bright, eyes cold. The court demanded blood. The guards demanded permission. The client envoy trembled. Jonah stood at the side. Hands open, heart pounding. He knew this moment was the real test. Not whether he could refuse a queen in private, but whether he could refuse an empire in public. Salith lifted her hand. The court fell silent, hungry for the verdict. Execute, her advisor urged. Make the lesson visible. Salith looked at Jonah, only for a heartbeat. Then back to the envoy. Her voice came out sharp, familiar. The queen voice, kneel. She ordered the envoy. Swear, and you live, refuse, and you die. The envoy tried to speak, but fear strangled the words. Jonah stepped forward, and the guards tensed. He did not shout, he did not posture, he simply spoke. Clear, steady, no, Jonah said, not like this. A gasp rippled through the court. Salith's eyes snapped to him. You dare, she said. Jonah kept his gaze level. I dare because you asked me to show you who humans are, he said. Humans do not build loyalty with terror. They build it with justice. If you kill this envoy, you win tonight. And you lose a century. The advisors hissed. The court roared, not with voices, but with a wave of outrage. Salith rose. And for a moment, Jonah thought she would finally crush him. Her aura pressed down like gravity. Her crown blazed under the lights. Then she did something that made the room tilt. She inhaled, slowly, and her hand, the hand that had signed exterminations, lowered. She looked at the trembling envoy and said, Softer, stand. The envoy blinked, confused. Salith's voice grew. Firmer, stand, she repeated. Speak, without fear. The envoy's breath came in broken pieces. Then words formed. They spoke of starving worlds, of children traded for medicine, of minds stripped bare. They spoke of tribute quotas that made survival impossible. They spoke of rebellion not as greed, but as panic. As the envoy spoke, Jonah watched Salith's expression. At first it was controlled neutrality, then it became discomfort, then it became something like grief, quickly hidden, a queen hearing the consequences of her own order. Not filtered through advisors, not polished into convenient lies. Raw human. When the envoy finished, Salith stood silent. The court waited. The advisors waited. Jonah waited, knowing one decision would either open a new future or slam the door shut. Salith spoke, and the words sounded like they cost her. Release them, she said. Send medical aid. Reduce the tribute for one cycle. Audit the governors who enforced cruelty beyond law. The court erupted into chaos. Advisors shouted. Guards looked uncertain. Nobles whispered panic. A queen had shown mercy, and mercy was contagious. It could spread. It could unmake the empire. Salith turned, eyes blazing now, not with cruelty, with resolve. Silence. She commanded, and the court obeyed. Then she looked directly at Jonah, in front of everyone. Human Jonah Reed, she said, you have disrupted my palace. You have infected my court. With questions you have made me hesitate. Jonah swallowed. He did not know whether this was love or execution. Salith stepped down from the throne, slow, deliberate. She stopped an arm's length away, and her voice dropped so only those closest could hear. When you refused me on the balcony, she said, something inside me woke up, something that has been asleep since childhood. Jonah's chest tightened. He kept his hands open, but his heart felt like it was closing from fear. Salith continued, I am told queens do not fall in love, she said. Queens take, queens conquer, queens consume. She held his gaze, and the intensity in her eyes made Jonah forget the throne behind her. But I think, she said, that queens fall in love when someone refuses to be owned, and still chooses to stay. The court could not hear those last words, but they saw the queen's face. They saw the softness at the edge of her mouth, the warmth that did not belong in a war room. They saw the human steady posture, respectful, unbroken. And rumors ignited like sparks in dry air. That night, the empire attempted to correct itself. A faction of nobles activated a security protocol older than Salith. A hidden council, the crown anchor, designed to remove any queen who became a hidden council, the crown anchor, designed to remove any queen. Their words, compromised. Compromised meant compassionate. Compromised meant human. Jonah was woken by pounding at his chamber door. A palisade whispered, urgent, they are coming. Not for you, for her. Jonah ran, not with a weapon, but with purpose. He found Salith alone in the corridor outside the star balcony. her fabric whipping in the wind, crown still on, eyes bright with fury. Guards surrounded her, not her loyal guards, strangers in imperial black. The crown anchor had arrived. Seelith's voice was ice. "You will stand down," she ordered. A leader stepped forward. "By authority older than your reign, we declare you unfit. Your hesitation endangers the empire. Your mercy weakens the tribute chain. Your interest in a human proves corruption." Seelith's expression flickered, shock and then rage. Jonah stepped into view, hands open, between weapons and queen. The black guards aimed at him immediately. Seelith's voice cracked like lightning. "Do not touch him," she commanded. The leader smiled thin. "Watch carefully, your majesty. This is the lesson you forgot. Command is real only when others fear to refuse." They ordered Jonah to kneel, or we fire. Jonah's heart hammered. He glanced at Seelith. In her eyes he saw something terrifying. Not power, not pride. Fear, not fear. For herself, fear for him. Jonah lifted his hands higher. "Come, I will not kneel," he said, "and I will not fight you. But I will not let you murder a chance at peace." The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. Seelith moved, fast, like a queen becoming a blade. Her hand lifted, and Jonah felt the palace systems respond, lighting shifting, doors sealing, security grids awakening. She could annihilate them. Then Jonah did the one thing that truly tested her love. He turned his head slightly and spoke, not loud, but firm. "Seelith," he said, "nitrogen monoxide." The word hit her like a hand on her chest. She froze, crown gleaming, fabric snapping in the wind. The black guards hesitated, confused, because you said no to a queen in a coup and lived. Jonah kept his hands open. "Do not massacre them," he said. "If you do, you prove them right. If you do, you become what they want you to be." Seelith's breath shook, once. Her eyes flashed with a storm of emotion she had never been allowed to show. Anger, betrayal, grief, desire, loneliness. Then her jaw tightened, and she lowered her hand, slowly, like lowering a weapon. The leader laughed. "Look at you," he said, "tamed by a human." "You are already unfit." Seelith stepped forward, and her voice became quiet, deadly controlled. "I am not tamed," she said. "I am awake." She turned to the guards, not shouting, not pleading. She spoke with the power of a ruler who had found a new law. "Stand down," she said. "If you will not, then you may leave this palace alive, but you will leave as exiles, stripped of name and rank, because the empire will not be ruled by cowards hiding behind tradition." The black guards faltered. The crown anchor leader snarled. "You think they will follow you now?" Seelith looked at Jonah for a heartbeat. Then back at the leader, she raised her chin, crown catching warm rim light. "They will follow me because they have seen something stronger than fear." She said, "They have seen restraint. They have seen a queen who can refuse her own rage. They have seen a human who refused my command and still protected my soul." The leader's face twisted. He lunged, weapon rising. Jonah moved first, not with violence, with position. He stepped into the angle, pushed the barrel aside with an open palm, and took the hit meant for Seelith. The shot burned across his shoulder, tearing suit fabric. Scorching skin. Pain flared white, hot, immediate. Seelith screamed his name. Raw, not queenly, Jonah. The courtyard guards surged in, loyal ones. The coup collapsed into shouting and retreat. The crown anchor leader was dragged away, spitting threats, and Jonah, dizzy, bleeding, felt Seelith's hands on him. Careful, trembling, her eyes were wide, shining, furious at the universe for daring to hurt him. "Why?" she whispered, voice breaking. "Why would you take pain for me?" Jonah tried to smile, but it came out as a breath. "Because I refuse to let you become a monster again," he said. "Because I refuse to let them steal the part of you that just learned mercy. Because, Seelith, I stayed." She pressed her forehead gently to his, crown angled away so it would not cut him. Her breath was warm, her voice soft. "You refused my command," she said, "and you saved my throne. And now you have saved my heart." Jonah's vision blurred, not just from pain, from the sudden weight of what was happening. A queen, the most dangerous ruler in 3 systems, holding him like he mattered, not as a tool, not as a trophy, like a person. Salith lifted her head, and her eyes burned with something new, not conquest, commitment. She stood and turned to her gathered court, her loyal guards, the watching advisors. Her voice carried across the terrace. From this night onward, she declared, the Vayari Empire will not demand obedience as proof of belonging. It will demand integrity. It will demand truth. It will demand courage. And anyone who believes fear is the only glue of civilization may leave. The court trembled, not because of threat, because history had shifted. Days later, Jonah stood again on the star balcony, his shoulder bandaged. Salith stood beside him, crown in place, fabric moving in the wind. The distant planet glowed like a promise. Star Boca shimmered like 1,000 tiny witnesses. You are leaving, she said quietly, to report to your people. Jonah nodded. I have to, he said, but I will return, if you still want partnership. Salith's mouth softened, cute again, almost shy. And it made Jonah's chest ache. Do you know what I fear? Human, she asked. Jonah looked at her. What? Salith inhaled, and her voice went small for the first time. I fear you will become like the others, she said. I fear you will bow because it is easier. I fear you will say yes when you mean no, because you are tired. Jonah lifted his hands, open, the same gesture from the first night. Then he lowered them gently and took her hands instead. He did not pull, he did not claim, he simply held. I will not bow, he said, and I will not flatter, and I will not obey fear. If I say yes to you, it will be because I choose you, not because you command me. Salith's eyes glistened. Her voice came out like a confession. Then choose me, she said. Not as a subject, as someone who sees me. Jonah's heart thudded loud. He spoke the words that felt like stepping into a storm on purpose. I choose you, he said, and I still refuse your command. Salith laughed. A real laugh, warm, stunned. Then she leaned closer, careful, respectful, as if learning love the same way she learned mercy. She touched her forehead to his again, crown gleaming beside his temple. And in that contact, Jonah felt the impossible truth settle into place. A queen who had been trained to take, learning to ask. A human who had been trained to survive, learning to stay. The galaxy would not change overnight. There would be rebels, there would be riots, there would be factions that hated this new law. But something had begun that could not be undone. Because once a queen learned that love could not be commanded, once she tasted the sweetness of consent freely given, fear became less delicious, cruelty became less necessary. And the Empire's old story started to fade like a shadow under sunrise. When Jonah finally turned to leave, Salith did not order him to return. She did not demand promises. She simply said, voice steady and intimate, come back to me because you want to. Jonah paused at the balcony threshold, and he looked back at her, crown catching warm rim light, fabric moving like a banner of a new age, eyes bright with a love that still startled her. He nodded once, and his voice carried quiet certainty. I will come back, he said, because I want to. And as his ship lifted into the star dark, the Vayari palace remained behind like a jewel, not just an empire, a turning point, a place where a single refusal had become the beginning of a different kind of rule, a rule where even an alien queen could fall in love, not with obedience, but with a boundary. The stars watched in silence, and for the first time in a long time, the galaxy felt like it might be healing.